Hey everybody, it's Masora back with you talking today about solving absolute value equations. We're going to be working on this for a couple of days, so don't stress if you're struggling a little bit at the very beginning here. I'm going to add a couple of quick notes before we get into how to solve these. There's some really easy steps that you can follow. The first thing you want to do whenever you see an absolute value in an equation is you want to isolate the absolute value. Okay, that's the first thing that you need to make sure you take care of. Once the absolute value is by itself on one side of the equation, then the second thing you're going to do is you are going to create two cases. Okay, and I'm going to say the positive and the negative. You're going to create two separate equations and solve both of those equations, and those will give you your two values for your solution. So, for example, number one right here, number one already has the absolute value isolated. So that means that the absolute value of k is equal to 6 means that k could equal a positive 6 or k could equal a negative 6. All you're going to do is change the sign on the whatever number happens to be on the other side of your equal sign. Okay, so sometimes the variable is isolated already or isolated very easily. Sometimes, like in number 2, we have a little bit of work to do. So the first thing that I would do with a problem like problem number 2 is I would actually cross multiply these two, because the absolute value is in the numerator here, but we have two fractions to deal with. So the first thing that I would suggest doing is to cross multiply these two equations. So if we do that, well, 3 times 32 is going to be 96 absolute value of k is equal to 8 times 15 is going to give us 120. So now in order for us to isolate the absolute value from here, we're going to have to divide both sides by 96 to get rid of the 96 here. Well, now the trouble we run into is 120 does not divide by 96. However, it does reduce down to 5/4. So what we have here is the absolute value of k is equal to 5/4. So now we're where we were with problem number 1. We're going to split it into the two cases. So k is either a positive 5/4 or k is a negative 5/4. So again, that's going to be when you have two fractions on either side of your equal sign. Now in a problem like 3, the absolute value, okay, we're not worried about the variable so much, but the absolute value is the only thing on the left side of the equation. So technically, your absolute value has already been isolated. So that means we need to create two cases. So the positive case, we're going to take what was in the absolute value bars and make it equal the positive of whatever was on the other side of the equal sign. And then separately, we are going to do the exact problem from the inside of the absolute value bars and make it equal the negative version. And then we solve each of these independently. So on the left, we'll add 7 to both sides. So one of the possible answers would be that a is equal to 15. And if we add 7 to the other side of this equation, we would find out that a is also equal to a negative 1. So whether you plug in a negative 1 into this equation or a 15 into this equation, and you do negative 7 plus that number, either one of those is going to give you an absolute value of a positive 8. Now, in a problem like number 4, the absolute value is not by itself. It's being divided by 9. So the first thing we need to do on both sides is to get rid of the divided by 9. Well, how do you undo division? You multiply. So we multiply both sides by 9. So then we get the absolute value of x minus 2. 5 times 9 is 45. The absolute value is now isolated. Now we make our two cases. X minus 2 equals a positive 45, and x minus 2 equals a negative 45. Solve them like separate cases. Add 2 on the equation on the left, so we get x equals 47, and we add 2 to the equation on the right, and we get x equals a negative 43. Both of those are our solutions to that equation. Let's look at a few more. Absolute value number 5 has already been isolated, so now we create two separate cases. 10 plus 4x equals 14, and 10 plus 4x equals negative 14. Subtract 10 on both sides, so we get 4x equals 4. Divide both sides by 4. Now we're back to solving just like we did in earlier sections. So we get x equals 1 for the left equation. Subtract 10 for the second equation. We get 4x equals negative 24. Divide both sides by 4, and we get x equals a negative 6. Couple more problems real quick. So then in number 6, this negative 2, remember you can't distribute, these aren't parentheses, you can't distribute into an absolute value. So we need to undo this multiplication here. So we're going to divide both sides by a negative 2 before we do our separate cases. That's going to get rid of this. So we're left with the absolute value of 6x plus 2. If we do negative 28 divided by negative 2, we'll get a positive 14. And now we do our two separate cases. 6x plus 2 equals 14, and 6x plus 2 equals a negative 14. So two separate cases. Subtract 2 on the left equation. Leaves us with 6x equals 12. Divide by 6. And we get x equals 2. Subtract 2 on the right equation. Leaves us with 6x equals negative 16. Divide both sides by 6. Now you might be noticing here, well, 16 doesn't divide by 6. That's okay. Just means that one of our answers happens to be a fraction. We want to make sure we reduce it to lowest terms, and that would give us negative 8/3. And our last equation, this one has a couple of steps to it, so let's give ourselves some room to work. So this says 3 minus 4 times the absolute value of 5v plus 6 equals negative 81. Start farthest away from your absolute value. This is a positive 3, so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to subtract 3 from both sides. We're still trying to get our absolute value isolated. So we have negative 4 times the absolute value of 5v plus 6. Negative 81 minus 3 is negative 84. Now we're at a situation similar to what we saw in number 6. We're going to divide both sides by the negative 4. That leaves us with the absolute value of 5v plus 6 equals 21. Now our absolute value is isolated. Now we separate into two cases. 5v plus 6 equals 21, and 5v plus 6 equals negative 21. Split down the middle and solve both sides. Subtract 6 on the left equation. 5v equals 15. Divide by 5. Divide by 5. So v equals 3. There's our first answer. Subtract 6 from the right equation. We get 5v equals negative 27. Divide by 5 and divide by 5, but 27 doesn't divide by 5, so our second answer is a fraction, but that is already in lowest terms, so we are all done. So your homework tonight, you have 10 problems on solving some absolute value equations. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and thank you for watching, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.